3, 2, 1. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We'll wait for a few seconds until the audience builds up, inshallah ta'ala. I have with myself brother Suboor from IRA UK. And आज का जो सेशन है बहुत स्पेशल है और इंशाल्लाह ताला उम्मीद है कि आप सब लोगों को फ़ायदा होगा. We'll wait for a minute or so until some people join us, inshallah. And I'm very sorry for the delay. There were a few technical issues we were actually sorting out. So, Brother, how is your trip going in Pakistan so far?
It's strange being here in the winter. I'm normally here in the summer. So it's a bit of a strange thing how in the daytime it's kind of hot and at night time it just gets really cold. And then there's the whole crazy protest last week. You know, I was actually quite near them. So I went on a rooftop once and I saw a whole bunch of people.
Okay, alhamdulillah. The people are joining us. So briefly, Brother Suboor is here from the UK. He works with IRA, and he has you have spent all your life in the UK, right?
Yeah.
Okay. He works with IRA from the past how many years, Suboor?
It's been about 8 years now.
8 years now.
Yeah.
Okay, alhamdulillah. He is an outreach specialist, and his specialization is in the field of evolution and specifically Darwinism. And you'll get to know about this more in the due course, inshallah ta'ala. So, Brother Suboor, let's begin, inshallah ta'ala. Before we go in detail about science and its, how it undermines God and its limitations, first I want to ask you your opinion about science generally. How do you see it, especially in that area of West?
Sure. I mean, one of the first things we need to do is we need to understand that we own science. So, when you say you take a name like, I don't know, Hanifa, right? We know that that is the name of one of the Sayyids of the Prophet ﷺ. We know that that is also one of the names of one of the great scholars of Islam. So when you hear the word Hanifa, you're like, that's me. We know what that means. This is a name we can affiliate to, this is a name we can relate to. I want Muslims and I want us to understand actually science is the same thing. Why that's the case is because science, before it was what we today consider to be science, it was proto-science. It's what the Greeks did. And the Greeks did a lot of theorizing. They did a lot of abstract thinking. They didn't have this methodological approach of studying the world, doing experiments, publishing results, getting them peer-reviewed, and moving forward. They didn't have this. The first person, historically, to put together what's today considered to be science, not proto-science, is a Quranic scholar by the name Hassan ibn Haytham. Right? Now, Hassan ibn Haytham, he was an amazing, eminent Quranic scholar, and he was also a scientist. And what he says is in his own biography is he says, I'm doing science so I can become closer to God. That's his objective. Now, what he basically did that was different to the Greeks before him is that he said you have to have falsification, you have to have natural understanding, you're only going to go with natural causes and effects, and also that you have to have experimentation. You can't just have a random theory. Which is why, interestingly enough, when we look at the birth of the scientific method, you always hear of people like, Francis Bacon. And you hear, Francis Bacon, he basically did this or did that. What's really interesting is that Hassan ibn Haytham existed 1,000 years ago, way before Bacon. And in fact, Bacon wrote a summary of Ibn Haytham's work, which was Latinized, and which was then used throughout Europe. So he himself was directly inspired by Hassan ibn Haytham. So the beginning of the scientific method, it's usually referred to as it was Francis Bacon, but it actually wasn't. It was actually Hassan ibn Haytham,
a Muslim scientist.
A Muslim scientist. So the first thing is, whenever we hear the word science, we need to be like, okay, that's mine.
We should own it. Yeah.
We own that particular thing. Secondly, we need to understand that science is one tool of looking at the world. Today, we live in a world of materialism. The amount of materialism that we have today is unprecedented in human history, in terms of the lifestyle that we live and the way we're totally dependent on technology and whatnot. And because of this, you obviously want to be grateful to something that you benefit from, like science. So what automatically starts to happen is we start to have this sort of deification of science, like science is some entity which has given us risk of something, or is provided for us, or is helping us, or we're worried about a super tsunami hitting a certain part of the world. Science is going to save us. A new virus is coming. There's a type of deification of science. And that's something which is unfortunate, because science is now, especially since the European sort of Renaissance, it's become something which is a mantle which is held by the West, which comes supposedly with a godless theology, with an atheistic, secular ideology.
This brings me to the second point. What do you think? Does science undermine God?
A bike and all of its mechanics and the fuel that goes in, that can all be explained as one composite type of process. So you can actually look into the beginning point from when you put in the fuel to the point that you are actually riding the bike, and all of that can be explained mechanistically. However, Taha, imagine you are on your bike, right, and you're really enjoying yourself, you're doing wheelies or whatever, and then I don't
do wheelies, by the way.
Right. You're a good boy. You do something else, right? So I stop you and I say, Taha, can I just have a quick word with you? Your bike, right? I can explain to you how it works. In fact, I've got a pen here, and I'm going to explain to you, this is how it works, this is how it works, this is how it works, this is how everything works. I spend an hour and I draw out for you a map. This is how your bike works. And then I say to you, your bike doesn't have a designer. Because I've explained to you how it works, there's no need to question where it came from or why it exists. Would that be a rational thing to do?
No.
Why not?
Yeah, sorry. I believe yes.
If I explain to you how your bike works, does that mean I've explained why it exists in the first place?
No.
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 It's irrational.
Yeah.
The two things are two different categories. How the bike works does not undermine that the bike has a designer.
True.
These are two different things. Supposedly today, what we are told is, because science has explained it's accepted, it's pushed out, but at an academic level, it's seen as kind of childish.
So if my khala sends me an amazing pizza, right? Science can explain what are the ingredients, how much cheese is in it, and how many olives are there, how many mushrooms are there, and where did mushrooms come from, and where did olives come from. but science cannot explain why did my khala send this pizza to me.
That's a personal. There's a personal agency involved, and science doesn't deal with that. Now, think of it of another way, right? So we have our brain. Now, the mind that we are using to communicate right now, this mind, from a purely scientific point of view, is just grey matter. That's all it is. But that's an assumption in science. That doesn't mean that that is the actual reality. So when scientists go out and study the world, they don't look for anything supernatural. They assume there is no supernatural as an assumption, and they try to go along and just come up with natural explanations for everything, which is, there's nothing wrong with that fundamentally as a methodology. But if somebody takes that and then says, therefore there's no God, or therefore there's no mind, or therefore there's no morality, or therefore there's no this or that, then they are overstating their case.
So people become so much certain about science, right? And they believe that this is the ultimate solution, and once we have science, we don't need anything else. So does science lead to certainty?
See, this is another very basic misunderstanding to do with the philosophy of science. Now, whenever you study a topic, you need to study it from its foundations. So if me and you are having a debate, say I'm a Christian, right, supposedly, and I'm saying Jesus is God because the Bible says so, and you start arguing with me, Jesus is not God using the Bible. The assumption that we're both under is that the Bible is the reference point. And I need to prove Jesus is God using the Bible. You need to show Jesus is not God using the Bible.
Based upon our assumptions that it's the word of God.
It's the word of God, this is the truth, this is our yardstick. Right? So when it actually comes to science, the assumption actually is, in the conversations that we're having, is that it leads to certainty. That's an assumption. It's never proven, there's never any evidence given for that. And two, is that it is the best way of gaining knowledge. It is the root of knowledge. And this is a sort of scientism. This is an excessive dogmatic sort of belief that science is a worldview from which we can extract knowledge and everything else is irrelevant. Both of these things are actually false. That science does not give you certainty, and this is a consensus in the philosophy of science, that science can never ever give you absolute concrete conclusions. Two, science being the only root of knowledge is complete nonsense. Because the majority of our knowledge is not, if you like, scientific. It may be rational, it may be intuition or whatever, but the vast majority of it is not based on us doing empirical science itself.
What logical and rational arguments can you use and tell us to believe that science doesn't lead us to certainty?
Okay, so the first thing to do is to realize that this is not a point that we as Muslims are making. This is a general point which is true regardless of whether we made it or not. And the point is this: the philosophy of science teaches us that science is based upon what's known as induction. Induction means you take a limited set of observations and you make a general conclusion. Now, the way it would work is this. So me and you, we are sitting around in, this is like what, G11 and G8, whatever, right?
Yes.
We're sitting around here somewhere, right? So then what me and you do is we're like, what color are, birds in Islamabad? So we're just sitting around. So me and you are scientists, and me being the supervisor, I get you to write. So I'm like, I see a grey bird, you write grey. See another grey bird, write grey. We keep documenting this. We document 1,000 birds which are grey. And that limited set of data, we make a general conclusion. All Islamabad birds are grey. What may happen after a few days or a few weeks, we may see a blackbird or a red bird. And what's happened is that one piece of data has challenged our previous conclusion. So this is known as the problem of induction, which was first highlighted by...
And science is based upon this method, induction.
Yeah, and you see, that is probabilistic, what I just explained, but when we look at science, that's a basic problem in science. There are a lot more probabilities involved. Because science is not as simple as that. That's a very simplistic way of trying to explain the point, but it's a lot more. There's a lot more probabilities involved in that. So nothing in science can you say, okay, we've got this piece of information and that's it, we've got it, and it's not going to change, because that piece of information is based on a limited set of observations, and in the future you may have a contradiction. So you can't say that that's true for certain.
what happens is nowadays it's a concept that science is the ultimate solution, and there is no, they understand that logic is science, emotions is science,
Rationality
is science. So what is the difference between logic and science, emotions and science, rationality and science?
Okay. So the first thing we need to do is we need to step back a bit and realize what's actually been happening. Now, what's actually been happening is we've been getting groomed, we've been getting primed into thinking that science is the way, the truth, the life, right? Science is a wonderful way of trying to arrive at knowledge. However, science itself, number one, is based upon mathematics and logic. You cannot solve a logical problem like pure logic is mathematics. You can't solve a mathematical problem using science. Science presumes logic and mathematics. Secondly, science is based upon some metaphysical principles. For example, the world is real. Science cannot prove the world is real. Science just has to assume the world is real. Lastly, there's, for example, things that we know to be true, like morality. There is right, there is wrong, and these things do exist. They're not just chemical stimuli, right? These are real.
Can you explain this to us by examples?
Okay, so let's put it this way, right? So you are riding a bike and you come across a little kitten, it's on the road, and you deliberately swerve your car to run over the kitten. And there is an observer over there, say it's some woman who's like really into animal rights and stuff. She looks at you doing that act. What would she conclude? She would conclude that's barbaric, that's wrong, that's savage, that's evil. However, scientifically, all we have in terms of the data in front of us is rearrangement of atoms in the set in terms of the cat, motion, speed, velocity, sound waves. Where's the morality? Where's right and wrong? There's nothing there, right? So science is not there to give you that. Science is purely there, as you can see, as a very limited method, because nothing drives human beings like moral issues. Nothing. You can tell somebody 1 + 3 is 4. It's not going to move them. You can tell somebody this is the law of conservation or something, right? You can just give them some logic or some maths or whatever, or some science. It's not going to move them. But you tell them a social issue that they're really, really passionate about, they're going to come to life. Nothing drives human beings like morality. Yet morality is something that science can say absolutely nothing about. That's one thing. Secondly, the majority of human knowledge is testimonial knowledge. So, do you believe a country exists called Panama?
Yes.
Right. How do you know that country exists?
Because maybe I've met somebody who has been to Panama.
But that's testimonial. That's not science. That's testimonial. Somebody came and testified that they're from Panama. Now you may see a video online which shows you the landmarks of Panama. But then again, that's testimonial. You haven't been there. The existence of that country is based upon testimony. Right? In your mind. The vast majority of human knowledge is actually testimonial. Now this doesn't mean we accept the testimony of anybody about anything. There's a pink elephant going crazy in the car park. No, we don't just accept any testimony. But testimony that is verified, that is repetitive, it comes through different modes. Different people are repeating that piece of information. It's been recurrent and so on and so forth. You'd be illogical to reject it. The vast majority of human knowledge is not based upon science. It's testimonial, it's based on logic, it's based on maths, and maybe intuition, and like I said before, self-evident truths. However, one thing which is very interesting is we as Muslims have an additional, if you like, weapon or additional insight into epistemology. Epistemology is the theory of knowledge, how you know what you know, how we know what we know. And that is the fitrah, which is the natural disposition in human beings. Now generally, because we have been sort of secularized and westernized, we just accept certain Western notions without really questioning them, which are really outdated even from a Western perspective. They've moved on. But because we're always a couple of 100 years behind, we're still going along. And that's the idea of the tabula rasa, right? That we are born a blank slate and we have to acquire knowledge. There's no such thing as inbuilt knowledge. But from an Islamic perspective, that's not true. From an Islamic perspective, the Prophet ﷺ said, every child is born upon the fitrah. And it's their parents that change their religion, so societal pressures. Now, what is the fitrah? The fitrah is primarily your recognition of God. You recognize there is a creator. So somebody may say all their life, do you know what, I don't believe in God. I don't believe in God. I don't believe in this. I don't believe in these mullahs and this and that, and I'm going to be a humanitarian, I'm going to be this, I'm going to be that. They find out they got cancer. They got 3 weeks to live. You watch them change their reaction. Right? And that's the fitrah. You know, people start praying. People start calling out to God. When somebody is in a very dire situation, they may be on a motorbike, they may be going really, really fast, they may have an accident, they may spin over, they may have blood coming out of their cheekbone or whatever, they may think they're going to die. At that moment, they're going to remember God. Why? Because that's the fitrah. So from an Islamic perspective, we don't need science or logic or anything else to verify the existence of God. The existence of God is basic. It is a self-evident truth. We don't need to prove it. Science can work, or reason can work as a trigger to bring that up. And so can spiritual experiences or near-death experiences and so on and so forth.
And Allah SWT has given an example in the Quran as well, that when these mushrikeen of Makkah, when they are traveling on a ship and in the sea, and when a storm hits them, they sincerely ask Allah SWT without associating any partners with Him. But when they reach to the surface and when they're safe, they start calling on the partners as well.
Yes.
So that's the fitrah which hits them hard, and they call upon Allah SWT.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the thing is that from a, if you like, a Western philosophical point of view, or a viewpoint of, say, a hard-nosed scientist, the fitrah would be absolute nonsense. Right? From them, it'll be like, we don't accept this. But the fact of the matter is that they can all disagree, but the reality of the fitrah is something which is undeniable. And it's not only undeniable from our own personal experiences, but it's also undeniable in the sense that even those type of people who do not believe in God, those, say, certain type of ardent atheist philosophers or scientists who say, there is no God, we don't believe in God, they still live their lives in accordance to some principles which are fitri. And I'll give you some proof for this. So you have someone like Richard Dawkins, right? He says, there is no God, there is just matter, and in fact, even in his writings, he's very clear about the idea that there is no right, there is no wrong. All we have is blind chemical and physical reactions going on around us. However, so he says this one thing, which is completely against the fitrah. There is no God, and everything is, if you like, the same. That we have right and wrong is just, if you like, a survival mechanism to help us survive. That's how we develop morality. So he's got all these ideas. However, something happens in the news which is supposedly immoral or bad from his perspective. He gets angry, he comes on TV, he's emotional, he's talking about it. Well, you can't have it both ways. You can't say there is no God, there is no morality, there is no this, there is no that, and then you are acting with those things like right and wrong. But we know that right and wrong is a fitri thing, because Allah's put that inside of us. Of course, in your fitrah, it doesn't give you the usul of fiqh, or it doesn't give you something detailed, but it does give you the notions of right and wrong. Even when the Prophet ﷺ came and he spoke to the mushriks of Makkah, and he highlighted, free the slave, don't bury the female child, don't do this, be nice to people, this and that. Why did he not justify those things? He didn't need to, because deep down even they knew there was a right and wrong. For example, they were involved in prostitution and they used to get their female slaves as prostitutes. However, when they wanted to build the Kaaba, they never used that money for that.
Very true.
So the fitrah is always there, you know? And I think this is one of the things about some of our Muslim brothers and sisters at university, that you know, when they come to university and they sometimes travel abroad and they are, you know, get their faith gets attacked by the professor or by the students, and you know, they react rather than proactively. Like, for example, someone will say God doesn't exist, and they'll be like, God does exist. Let me give you an argument, cosmological argument, or moral argument, or design argument, or whatever. But they don't even need to do that, because fundamentally, even that person deep down inside, if they were to tomorrow get cancer, their fitrah would come out. And I've had personal experiences with non-Muslims where they've told me themselves that when they got into very dire situations in their life, although they were atheists until that point, they automatically called upon God without hesitation in that instant moment of desperation. There's no logical explanation for that except that this is fitri.
And even Dr. Justin Barrett, he had a research on this.
Yes,
that if you put different kids into different islands, and if they live alone and they grow up in that island in isolation, they'll start believing in one God.
Yes.
Maybe they won't know his name, but they'll start believing in one God.
Some sort of theism. And the thing is that he has an evolutionary explanation for this. So he tries to explain it in terms of evolution of religion. You know, we're hardwired according to him. I mean, we both agree, the data says we're hardwired. But his explanation is not one of the fitrah. His explanation is a naturalistic evolutionary one. However, what we can basically say is, well, you've got a story there. We've got a story as well. However, what makes more sense? I mean, let's really break it down, because fundamentally you don't need to justify the fitrah, but let's for the sake of argument, right? So you have this idea that human beings, according to the evolution of religion, we basically evolved this belief in God for unity, right? So to have social cohesion. Well, firstly, this is going to totally undermine all of the secular atheistic claims of the last 100 years that religion causes division and warfare. Because you can't have it both ways. You can't say we evolved the belief in God for social cohesion, and at the same time religion causes violence and division. You can't have it both ways. Two, if that is the case, why didn't we come up with a concept of God which is purely physical? Which some, obviously, people in the world do, like Hinduism, right? They have this concept of God which is physical, and which you can physically see, and the whole tribe can come around, and they can actually be united with that one God. Say if this social cohesion theory is correct. Why the concept of a transcendent creator who calls for equality amongst you and people which are not in your tribe? Because this whole theory is linked to genetics, right? You're good to your kin and you're good to your tribe because you're all linked. But let's look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ. In fact, let's do a Darwinian analysis of the Prophet ﷺ, right? His life. So the Prophet ﷺ came, and at that time, if you like, the behavior's quasi-Darwinian, because each tribe only cares about itself. It doesn't give a damn about the other tribes. So he comes along, he calls for the belief in a transcendent creator, right? Which doesn't make sense from a Darwinian point of view. Maybe a physical one, they can come up with the story, but not a transcendent creator that you can't see. Two, he's calling for people of different tribes to unite under this, who are not genetically as close as his own tribe. Again, non-Darwinian completely. And then what is he telling you? He is telling you, love for others what you love for yourself. Totally non-Darwinian. Look at the Selfish Gene as a book, and this is why I laugh at these sort of desi liberals who, I mean, I've had these people. Sometimes I've given a talk somewhere, I've got a video, and someone's like, read his book, read The Selfish Gene. You're like, sometimes brothers, like we're having a discussion, right? And me and you are just going off. It's like 1 o'clock in the morning. We're talking about, I don't know, whether crabs are halal or something, or kangaroos, yeah? Then you're like, oh, forget it. I'm going to give you this quote from Imam Abu Hanifa, or the Prophet ﷺ said. Like you're just dropping authority, and you want me to like quiver and hide underneath this table in the embryonic position, right? They do that same thing with these books. They haven't read these books, they don't understand these books, but they're like, read The Selfish Gene, the answer's there. The answer's not there. Because if you believe that's the answer, then you can't claim to be a humanitarian, because basically what that idea is you only care really and truly about yourself. And the selfish gene is, obviously genes can't be selfish, they can't be conscious, but the whole idea is you care about yourself, Mr. Number One, then you care about those which are closest to you genetically, not because they're your relatives, but because they carry your genes. So, like J.B.S. Haldane, a famous evolutionary biologist, said, I would lay down my life for 2 brothers or 8 cousins. So you can't be, we're humanitarian, we're this, we're that, right? We believe in progression, we believe in enlightenment, we believe in moderation, we believe in human rights, we believe in this. That all has to go out the window because you've just been throwing this universal acid, right? And that's, interestingly enough, an atheist philosopher, Daniel Dennett, he calls Darwinism universal acid because that's what it does. It burns all the relics of right and wrong and justice and civilization, and these are all actual illusions created to help us survive. And one of the analogies that's given by some atheist academics, some evolutionary atheist academics, is limited companies don't exist physically. They may have a name, they may have this, but they're not like a real thing. They're just something you made up to, sort of thing. And then he said, this particular academic said, religion is the same thing. It's just a collective thing like Islam or Christianity or Judaism to help you survive. Then he's honest enough to go a bit further. He said, human rights, feminism, humanism, whatever you want to call it, it's the same. It's just a complete, baseless, collective illusion to help us in our survival and reproduction. Anybody with even a little bit of sanity, and of course you needed to be sober at the same time, you realize it's total nonsense. Total nonsense that right and wrong is baseless. However, the only explanation for that you can give is actually the fitrah. Because even though people are going around saying we're atheists, we don't believe in God, we don't believe in this and that, they still act in their lives in accordance to principles that can only be explained via the fitrah.
And there should be an axiom,
Yes.
There should be a point of relativity that people should relate on.
A baseline.
A baseline, yes. This brings us to doubts. You have encountered many people, and we at Youth Lab have encountered many people. They quote many books as Selfish Gene and The God Delusion and stuff like that. And they say, okay, we have read these books and I'm all confused. Please help me out. I can't pray. I can't read Quran. What do you think that is actually?
Okay, so one thing, and this is in my experience, it's a bit of a placebo effect, right? So it's kind of like, oh bro, you know that water that you were drinking earlier, I think you might have had a cockroach. And you're like, oh, I don't feel so good, yeah? So they're kind of like, and it's quite interesting, right? It's kind of like, okay, there's this book written by this atheist guy, and people are saying that if you read this book, you become a kafir. But, I've got strong beliefs, so I'll be okay. Okay, I read this. I think I'm confused. Actually, I am confused. What do I do? What's very interesting is, and I've tried this many times, and I'm still dealing with people right now on WhatsApp who message me, and some people who've been messaging me for probably close to 2 years now, right? Same issue. Oh, I'm confused about this thing because I read this article, I read this, saw this video, read this book of Richard Dawkins, whatever. Okay, what exactly are you confused about? I don't know, he was saying all this stuff, and he had all this complicated language, and yeah, you forget that. Yeah? What are you actually confused about? I don't know, the guy, he's a professor, and it's like, come on man, what are you confused about, yeah? Just get to the point. I mean, I remember one case particularly, right? There's this brother who was like, I'm really confused, Richard Dawkins read this book, blah, 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 blah. Said, okay, what exactly is your problem? So he just came up with something, we dealt with it, we dealt with all those things. Then he goes, what if he comes up with something in the future we can't answer? And I was like, I felt like just giving him a slap. I was like, what are you talking about? And the problem is because they've taken their baseline as them. They must be right. Why must they be right? Because they've got civilization, their roads are paved, their economies are better than ours, and this and that and that. Therefore, they must be doing something right. Fundamentally, very interestingly enough, I mean, there's a friend of mine here who's studying in Islamabad, and he went to one of the universities, and there was an atheist professor at the university who was just banging on about there's no God, there's no this, there's no that. And when he was debating him, and my friend could easily smash all his arguments because this guy wasn't intelligent, he's just a bit of an idiot. His answer was, but look at the West, look how successful they are. Okay, but let's take that for a second, right? If the West wasn't successful, would you take their ideology? So if the answer is yes, I would take their ideology even if they were not successful. That means their success has nothing to do with their ideology. 2, if you say, no, I'm not going to accept it if they weren't successful, that basically means you're superfluous because you're going with whoever's successful. And that same person, what you can say to them is, you are a number one idiot, because if you were alive during the time of the Umayyads, you'd be a good Muslim because they were the number one. If you are alive during 1930s, you would be a Nazi if you were white. Why? Because the Nazis were way ahead of the rest of the world in terms of technology. Many of the things today that we subscribe to, maybe America or the Soviet Union, were actually designed by the Nazis. Surface-to-air missiles, camouflage, even they were going really, they had these advanced jet engines. I mean, everybody else in terms of the world, they had the spinning fans, you know, those little ones that make more noise than do work, right? The Germans had jet engines, right? They had all this technology. Now, if you just want to go by technology, then you should be a Nazi, really. And the fact of the matter is that when people say we are having doubts, we're having this issue, we're having that issue, the fundamental problem is that there isn't something which is causing them to doubt. They have actually adopted a paradigm which is, these guys must be right. And I'll give you an example from a moral point of view. We had this guy who said, you know, Islam's wrong, you know, there's logical problems with it, blah, 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 blah. So, you know, we met him and we asked him, okay, what's the problem? And he said, you know, your Prophet, he allowed this person who was ill to drink camel's urine, right? So I said, okay, what does that mean? How does that disprove anything? And in his mind, what it was he had a Western, liberal, secular understanding of morality or what's right and wrong, and he was certain about that. Therefore, anything that contradicted that, he'd be like, okay, I'm not going to take it. So doubts really arise from certainty, and they arise from certainty in a belief in something else. So when someone says, you know, the Quran, it talks about Musa and Fir'aun and, you know, but I don't know, I've looked a little bit at Egyptian archaeology and I can't really find evidence for that. What they're doing is they're putting higher testimonial weight on that than the Quran. And what we need to go back into whenever people are having these sort of doubts or having these sort of questions is this. We need to go back and ask a fundamental question. Why do we believe the Quran is the word of Allah? Why do we believe that is true? Because if you realize something is true and you have evidence that it's true, anything that contradicts that truth is falsehood. So if somebody realizes Islam is the truth, they don't need to study every other religion to know it's false. And if they know Islam is true, if they come across a piece of data which contradicts Islam, they know that the problems with that data are not with Islam. As an analogy, let's look at it from a Muslim living in the 1940s. So we have reasons, and we're not going to go over the reasons now, I'm sure you guys have workshops and talks on this, but say there's somebody who has lots and lots of evidence that the Quran is the word of Allah. Okay, now there's a consensus of when that person lives in the 1950s that all of the physicists in the world are saying the universe has no beginning. It's a static state theory that they believe in. The universe is eternal, it always existed, it always will exist, and that's it. The Quran makes a complete opposite claim. It says the universe has a beginning. Now, what can he do? He can either become a liberal and say, let me reverse engineer the verses to fit the science, or he can become somebody who rejects the science totally and says, look, I'm going to go with the Quran, or he can be somebody who's really rational and who says, do you know what? Science at best is based on induction, it has the problem of underdetermination as well, and it's based on the assumption of methodological naturalism and so on and so forth. The Quran I believe to be true because of all these reasons. We have this thing contradicting with this, well, I'll go with this. And we're somehow, you know, today we're sort of taught as if that's a bad thing. You know, how can you choose a book over something that people maybe have done research about, this or that about? But it's because we know that if something has a truth value, it cannot contradict reality, because the word of God is the Quran and the word of God is the world. If there is a contradiction, then like Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah said, that contradiction is in your head. That contradiction does not exist in reality. And that breaks down to, in terms of doubts, we need to go back into why we believe the Quran is the word of Allah. And once we reach that certainty it is the word of Allah, then we use that as our foundational base on which to look at the entire world. At the moment, the people who are having those doubts, their foundational base is not the Quran is true. Their foundational base is something for it to be true, it needs to be rational. And even if we weren't Muslims, that is not true, because many things exist even within quantum mechanics. Particles existing at the same time, changing when you observe them. These things can't be rationally observed, understood. So when we make our paradigm the Quran, then all of these issues get dealt with. But when we don't make the Quran our paradigm, it's like a game of whack-a-mole. You get rid of one doubt, another one pops up. You get rid of that, another one pops up. One issue is to do with embryology in the Quran, one issue is to do with evolution, one issue is to do with the existence of transmission of the Quran, one is to do with this, one is to do with qadr, until you submit to the authority of Allah, and that's based upon you understanding why this is the word of Allah. All your life, you're just going to be like a little person stuck on a plank in a rocky sea, constantly in turmoil, constantly in problems. When you realize this is the truth, then anything that confirms it, anything that contradicts it, that is what's wrong, and in the future we will discover why that is the case.
And people doubt for the sake of doubting something, because it has become a cool concept that if you are not doubting, if you're not thinking critically, you're not educated enough. So people start doubting.
And the whole idea is, when they say thinking critically, Allah says, do you not reason, do you not reflect, do you not think? When the people are being sent to Jahannam, the angels will say to them, did you not get a messenger to warn you? They said, yes, but only if we listened and reasoned, we would not be in hellfire. So anybody that uses their aql, their reasoning capacity, in the correct way, as in they don't let their emotions justify their reasons, rather they let their reasons be ends in themselves, they will realize this is the truth. Because I remember once there was this confused brother who messaged Abdul Rahim Green, and because I have admin and I get access to the pages, sometimes I read messages and stuff, and he said, what is the absolute proof that Islam is true? What is what sort of rationale can we give here? Can we do this? And the Shaykh Abdul Rahim Green, he just says something very simple. He said, Allah guides whoever is sincere. Right? That's not rocket science. Someone that's sincere, Allah will give them clear, rational reasons why this is true. But if you're not, you can even see Allah and reject Allah like Shaitan did. So, it may be, and somebody in my family, they study at one of the universities in Islamabad, and they were saying about how there's this sort of trend about people, pushing aside Islam and going into Buddhism. They love studying and looking into other things, and they're just doing it purely as an inferiority complex because of the West, not because they understand it. And I think to myself, you are giving up the Rasul for this. There are people that I know personally that cried, and they cried for guidance, and Allah guided them, and they were born in kuffar families. And you have muppets here who hear the azan, and they're like, well, I've been reading Richard Dawkins, and I'm like, what the hell is wrong with you? What is wrong with you? Because if you leave, Allah will replace you. You're not doing any damage by leaving Islam or becoming a Desi liberal or whatever. People are crying out for guidance on the other side of the globe, and you have complete fools on this side. People give all types of excuses. Oh, the mullahs here, they're jahil. Well, if they're jahil and you don't think they're good examples, you learn Islam better and you become the role model. Don't try these silly excuses like, oh, these Maulvis, they eat halwa and they steal people's money. Fine, you become a scholar in that case. Because when Salman al-Farsi came across the corrupt Christians, he still left Zoroastrianism for Christianity. He didn't say, these Christians are corrupt, I'm going to carry on with Zoroastrianism. Those are pathetic excuses. And it may be cool, it may be seen as, a fashionable thing, let's copy the West in whatever it's doing, let's do this, and that's a sad reality of the elite in Pakistan. However, we as Muslims, we are not people of fashion, we are people of tradition. And our empire spans back thousands of years. And every empire goes through a peak and a trough. And we may be at a low point today, but we're going to be at a high point tomorrow. Don't be amongst those people who, when victory comes, or when the if you like, the intellectual superiority of Islam becomes dominant, they're like, we were with you. Because that's what the munafiqs did. And don't be those people that when times are hard, you start calling Medina Yathrib. No, be a man, be a Muslim, be a strong Muslimah, and understand that the promise of Allah is true. The deen of Islam will spread to each corner of the world, as the Prophet ﷺ said before the end of time. Wherever the night and day reaches, that's where Islam will reach. Don't fall for the trap of following other people purely because that seems to be the cool thing to do. Because the coolest thing is not that, because that is what's going to lead you to Jahannam. What's going to lead you to peace in this life and peace in the hereafter is understanding who your Lord is, and understanding that whether you understand it or you don't understand it, submission to Allah is the only way of salvation.
Very true, very absolutely. Some people, even some practicing Muslims, they suffer through inferiority complex, and they try to prove Quran scientifically, and they are very happy when science proves an ayah to be true scientifically, and they're sharing the researches and saying, Alhamdulillah, science has proven this ayah of Quran right, and now we have more belief in Quran. So what do you say to these people when they prove Quran scientifically and they are happy?
So myself, I was one of these people a few years ago who was like, this is the way that you give dawah. You speak about scientific miracles, you do this, you do that. And I went to an event somewhere in northern England, and there was an elderly Irish revert who I was speaking to. And he was like maybe 70, like he's quite old, 60s, 70s, late 60s maybe. So, I was talking to him about, there's these amazing things in the Quran, there's this thing about the Big Bang, this thing about embryology. I was kind of young at the time. And he wasn't a philosopher, he wasn't a scientist, he wasn't an Islamic theologian, he was just what you would call a sort of abid, right? And he said to me, the Sahaba did not believe in this. This is not what they based their belief on. And this is not what you should do. And I was like, no man, this is it, this is the stuff. Only now, after many, many years did I realize he was spot on. Because the quality of you being a Muslim, if it's based upon something flimsy, you're going to be a flimsy Muslim. If it's based upon something solid, then you're going to be a solid Muslim. So you have people who convert to Islam and they are certain about Islam because they looked into it thoroughly, and they looked into it well, they looked into the seerah, they looked into all these things, and they became Muslim. And they stay upon Islam. Then you have people who I know of who converted to Islam purely because of either marriage, or sometimes they heard a nasheed, or they had a Muslim friend and they thought they'd try it out. Whereas one guy said, I just thought I'd try it out, innit? They don't stay in Islam. Why? Because their foundation is so pathetic. It's just like, I heard in the Nasheed, sounded nice, Khabib won that fight, maybe Islam's right. Very pathetic. That's the difference. So if your way of basing the truthfulness of Islam is based upon something like scientific miracles in the Quran, then you fundamentally need to do like an Aqidah check. You actually need to understand that, well, if you were alive at the time of the Sahaba, would you not be Muslim? And could there be, and this is just something I've been just spinning around in my head for a long time, for a few years now. Could there be any proof of Islam other than the Quran itself? I mean, if anybody, I truly believe this, if anybody is sincere and they're looking for the truth and they read the Quran and they reflect about it and they just think about the messages in it, let's leave aside the sociological miracle, linguistic miracle, the life of the Prophet ﷺ, the prophecies, all of those things. Just the message itself, you just read it and it just shakes you, right? If that's not proof for you, then what on earth is? And the fact that the Quran gives you the very message which is kind of like a circuit which is broken. Somebody comes along and connects it and electricity goes around, right? The message of Tawheed, the pure monotheism which brings the dead human body and heart to life, that is what the Quran does. That itself is proof. Now, if you go around pandering science from the Quran or this or that, and you use that not only for yourself but to teach others, that basically means you've completely missed out on something which gave the dead hearts life, which is the Quran, which is what the Sahaba believed in. And you're going for something which is so superfluous, so irrelevant. I mean, if you really think about it, right? I'll be honest with you. Let's do a little test, right? Taha, there's a book called Book X. This book has scientific miracles. It said things 3,000 years ago which came true today. 2, this book has historical information which we didn't know in the past but we just discovered now. For example, it told us that the Mayan civilization had an internal dispute in the 5th whatever century, whatever, right? And then we later on discovered through studying that that's the case. This book also has a linguistic miracle. This book also has a sociological miracle. This book was also amazingly preserved, and so on and so forth and whatnot. I give you all these proofs. Now, this book says that God is a man with 3 heads and he rests for 2 days of the week, and this God is sitting on a chair throwing down lightning on evil people. Do you want to convert to this religion?
No.
Why not? I gave you all these miracles.
Because the conclusion is not appealing.
Why not?
Because I can't believe in a religion who has a God with 3 heads and he is throwing.
What about a man who's going to bring your dead parents back to life, supposedly? He's going to command the sky to rain, it's going to rain. He's going to
pass by a desert and the desert turn green.
All these things. Bring the dead back to life, supposedly, right? If you're going to fall for that, you're going to fall for that. We don't go by abstract proofs. And interestingly enough, the idea of going by abstract proofs, this spiritually dead idea, number one, it's got no Islamic foundation, right? Of course, we have miracles, but those miracles we use to justify Islam after we realize the message of Tawheed and the Quran. So that's after. If we just want to go by abstract proofs, then we would go with anything. And this is purely, again, an inferiority complex. That when the Western world was at its peak, if you like, and actually not at its peak, even after its peak, it basically turned away from Christianity, right, during the Victorian era. And it turned away from Christianity, and there was a battle between the church and the secular sort of scientific establishment. People were burnt at the stake, and all these horrible things happened. So when the European colonial sort of rulers went all across the world, they taught people, look, guys, we already had this experience with religion and science. Just you're too dumb and pathetic to go through over the experiences that we went through. We already went through it, so trust us, religion's a bad thing. And that's what people ended up doing, that we simply accepted the notion of science versus religion because that's the experience they had in the Western world, and because of colonization, that's the experience we accepted. But Islamic history and the science and Islam did not have that battle. Exactly. In fact, science and religion went hand in hand because science sprouted out of a Quranic scholar, it sprouted out of the medieval Islamic empire, and it is something which is very, very interesting when you look at the early spread of Islam, the early golden age of Islam, that even today, when we have people who try and promote science during the golden era, that's still based on a Western understanding of the Islamic world, because the people who are promoted are generally the people who were heretics. They were people who may have called themselves Muslims, but they had ideas that the universe is eternal, or their concept of God was very, God is within His creation. So people who were like Ibn Sina and others, and I lost track of a few names, but people who clearly weren't orthodox Muslims. However, when you look at the scientific advancement of the Muslim world, the vast majority of these scientists were the orthodox. And even their so-called heretics, they weren't burnt at the stake. They were still allowed to do what they were doing, right? So his whole idea that science in the Quran is, science in early Islamic history, this was purely done by the heretics, not the Muslims, and so on and so forth. Total nonsense, right? So what we need to do is we need to understand that fundamentally our understanding of Islam, if it has deep foundations, we're going to build a tall building, it's going to look luxurious, it's going to stand, it's going to withstand earthquakes. But if your foundation is flimsy or it's got cracks, when the pressure comes, those cracks are going to go. And I remember something very, very powerful that Ustadh Hoblos from Muhammad Hoblos from Australia said. There was this very, very powerful video about Ali Banat, the brother, who got cancer and his reaction and everything. There's also another brother from Australia, exactly the same. He was much like he was into the deen even before the cancer. With Ali Banat, it was he was in transition. But Hoblos said something very interesting. I just found that really, really it really hit me. He said, "Don't think that's everyone's reaction." He says some people go the other way, right? They go the other way. That their building had cracks. They weren't really sure why they're Muslim. They were like, I'm Muslim because I think it's rational, but in reality, they were only Muslim because their parents were Muslim. Or they weren't really sure about something. And because they were so involved in the dunya, and they're so involved and engrossed in that, they didn't even bother trying to rectify those foundations. And when they may they may get hit by cancer, they may apostate. They may go in the complete other direction. So it's a very, very dangerous thing to leave it to the last minute. And I just want to say one other thing, that I sometimes get contacted by Muslim parents who say, my son's gone AWOL, please help me out, please do this, please do that, right? And I just think to myself, how the hell do you expect me to undo a lifetime of brainwashing? You've been telling your child from a young age nothing about Allah, nothing about His messenger. You've been teaching him maybe the Quran, the Qari Sahib used to come once a week and he doesn't even understand the language, right? All your life, your child has seen that you only care about people's perception. You've told them it's all about progress, it's all about going abroad and studying, it's about this and it's about that. And you've created this world where the child only believes in physical things. And now when the child is like 21, they don't want to get married to who you told them to, or they say, I don't want to be Muslim anymore, or they are being rude to the parents. Now you come along and you try and find someone, oh look, his beard is longer than an inch. Let me go to him, he's going to wave a wand and my son's going to be religious again. Sorry, it doesn't work like that. You've brainwashed him for 21 years to teach him nothing is more important than progress. Which is why, interestingly enough, when I get some Muslims who come over from places like Pakistan, one of the first things they say in terms of their doubts is, oh, if we're Muslim, why is the Western world successful? There's a hidden assumption there. The hidden assumption is progress means you're right. That's not true Islamically. Allah says in the Quran about a nation, when they turned away from Allah, when they turned away, Allah opened up the doors to everything. The Prophet ﷺ, when he was lying down, and Umar radiallahu anhu came, and he saw that he was lying down on this mat, and he had marks on his back, and he had a very simple setup. And at this time, Arabia had been conquered. And Umar radiallahu anhu was very, very hurt by seeing the Prophet ﷺ like this. He said, "O Prophet, the Caesar lives in his palace and he lives in this luxurious way, and the Caesar of Persia Islam. Islam doesn't say if you are materially successful, you are you're on the truth. The doubts that arise today amongst the youth, especially amongst the sort of elite class sort of people in Pakistan, is because we've told them from a young age, you need to be a doctor so people give you respect, you need to earn a lot of money, you need to make sure that your wife is better looking than that person's, your status needs to be like this. That's why these things come. There's a lot of emotion involved, there's a lot of psychology involved, but this is masked by logical issues. And the issues are not actually logical. It's a lot more deeper than that.
We got a comment from Nadeem Bhai, and he wants to say that please speak in Urdu as well for non-English speakers, for non-English listeners actually. Urdu mein baat kare. So can you give it a try?
मेरी उर्दू ठीक है, मगर कोई कोई जो लफ्ज़ होते हैं जो डिफ़िकल्ट टाइप ऑफ जिस तरह टेक्निकल वर्ड्स होते हैं वो मैं इंग्लिश बोल दूंगा और बाकी सारा इंशाल्लाह
ठीक है थोड़ा इंशाल्लाह ट्राई करते हैं. हमारा टाइम भी ऑलमोस्ट ओवर होने वाला है. क्वेश्चंस हैं हमारे पास?
नहीं है, नदीम भाई पूछना चाहते हैं.
ओके, कोई क्वेश्चंस अगर कोई करना चाहते हैं आप हमें, या किसी को कोई कंफ्यूजन है या कोई बाय द वे कैन यू गिव योर email address if someone wants to ask you a question?
You can go to my Facebook page. You can put the link up
sure
in the thing. So yeah, they can message me there.
किसी के आपके questions हो तो आप ब्रदर सबूर को इंशाल्लाह हम इनका पेज का लिंक इंशाल्लाह शेयर कर देंगे. आप उनको इनबॉक्स से पूछ सकते हैं इंशाल्लाह ताला. And request and the big request पे अमल करते हुए let's give it a try इंशाल्लाह. मेरे तो कोई मसला नहीं है बल्कि आज I feel
मेरा कोई मसला नहीं है अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह.
So any last few words सबूर भाई?
कुरान में एक बहुत ज़बरदस्त कुरान में एक बहुत ज़बरदस्त एक वर्स है जो मैं जिसके बारे में हम अगर सोचें तो बहुत आपको हिला सकती है इनसाइड कि do people not reflect that maybe the end of their lives is near? What message will they believe in after this? And मुझे एक चीज़ याद आती है. एक हमारे शेख हैं, एक टीचर हैं, वो एक दफ़ा बात कर रहे थे प्रॉब्लम ऑफ ईवल के बारे में, सफरिंग के बारे में. जिस तरह दुनिया के अंदर हर बंदे के साथ होना ही होना है कि या उसकी औलाद या आपके पेरेंट्स या आपके ब्रदर्स एंड सिस्टर्स किसी ना किसी को फोत होना है आपसे पहले. आपकी लाइफ के अंदर फाइनेंशियली अप्स एंड डाउन्स होती हैं, मैरिटल प्रॉब्लम्स होती हैं, कभी कभार कैंसर, डिजीज़ेस, कुछ ना कुछ प्रॉब्लम्स चलती रहती हैं, ईवल एंड सफरिंग होती है. ये लाइफ का पार्ट एंड पार्सल है. तो ये चीज़ कह रहे थे कि लोगों के कोई लोगों के रिएक्शन होते हैं कि अल्लाह ने क्यों किया, मैं बस छोड़ रहा हूँ, नहीं मैं किसी चीज़ को मैंने एक्सेप्ट नहीं करना. बट ये शेख हमें कह रहे थे कि हमारे पास चॉइस ही क्या है. अगर वो आपके साथ एक प्रॉब्लम है जिसके साथ आप डील कर रहे हैं, जो आपको डिफ़िकल्ट लग रही है और लाइफ में ये होगा, आपके पेरेंट्स को आपको खुद दफनाना पड़ेगा, ये बहुत डिफ़िकल्ट चीज़ होती है, मगर ये करना होता है, या आप उनसे पहले फोत होते हैं, या अपने औलाद में से कोई इस तरह हो जाती है कि डेथ हो जाती है, चीज़ होनी है. अगर आप अल्लाह से भाग जाएं, वो चीज़ उधर ही है, वो दुख उधर ही है. अगर आप अल्लाह के पास चले जाएं, वो दुख उधर है, मगर अब उसकी एक सोल्यूशन भी है. अब उसका आपका एक पैराडाइम है कि ये एक तरीका है डील करने का कि आखिरत में इन द हियर आफ्टर कोई चीज़ होगी, यानी और ये लाइफ भी लाइफ टेस्ट का है. ठीक है. तो जो लोग कहते हैं कि जिस तरह मुझे ये डाउट इशू है, या ये चीज़ है, या ये चीज़ है, ये जो लोग हैं जनरली जो हैं, ये मेरा एक्सपीरियंस है कि इनको अपनी सारी लाइफ में हर साल एक या दो चीज़ें लगती रहती हैं. एक महीना प्रॉब्लम हो गई, मसलन मैंने कोई चीज़ ऑनलाइन पढ़ी, इवोल्यूशन की, 6 महीने ठीक, जिस तरह बेसिकली आप बेसिक प्रैक्टिसिंग कर रहे हैं, फिर कोई कदर का इशू आ जाता है, फिर 6 महीने के बाद वो ठीक, फिर कुछ और ये मुझे एक किस्म की इसकी जो अंडरलाइन प्रॉब्लम होती है वो ये चीज़ नहीं है कि आपको वो डाइट है, वो अंडरलाइन प्रॉब्लम है कि आपका जो लाइफ मिशन है, जो आपका मकसद है, जो आपका पर्पस है, आपको वो समझ नहीं है. और आप अपनी लाइफ को आपने सॉर्ट आउट नहीं किया कि आप चाहते क्या हैं, और आपने हेयर आफ्टर के लिए आपने तैयारी की है कि नहीं. جب آپ اپنی لائف کو ڈائریکٹ کرتے ہیں کہ میں اپنی لائف اللہ کی طرف ڈائریکٹ کروں گا, یہ ساری پرابلمز یہ سارے سمٹمز غائب ہو جاتے ہیں. اور ایک میں یہ چیز وہ کہنا چاہوں گا جو میرے ایک دوست نے کہی تھی, جو بہت یعنی مشکل سے وہ مسلمان بنا تھا. یعنی اس کی فیملی جو تھی وہ کہہ سکتے ہیں ایگنوسٹک تھی, ٹھیک ہے, بلیو نہیں کرتی تھی, کچھ نہیں کرتی تھی. تو یہ بیسکلی اس نے بہت مشکل سے اسلام کو سرچ کیا, یہ کیا وہ کیا, ادر ریلیجن سرچ کیے, پھر اسلام کی طرف جب آنا چاہا تو اس کے ساتھ اسے اپنے فیملی کے اندر کوئی اس کے اندر شبہات ڈال رہا تھا. پھر وہ شبہات کی وجہ سے پہلے لگا اسلام سچ ہے, پھر شبہات کی وجہ سے وہ تھوڑا ٹرامیٹائز ہو گیا. پھر شبہات کو اس نے جا کے ریفیوٹ کرنے کے لیے اسٹڈی کیا. پھر اسٹڈی کرتے ہوئے اس نے اور چیزیں سیکھیں کہ اسلام واقعی صحیح ریلیجن ہے. اس نے اسٹرگل کیا اور مجھے اس کی سٹوری بہت اچھی طرح میں جانتا ہوں اس کو کہ وہ رو رو کے مسلمان بنا. وہ بھی ابھی بھی اس کی فیملی اس طرح کافر ہے. مجھے ایک دن کہتا ہے, اور یہ چیز میں کبھی نہیں بھولوں گا, دنیا کے لیے لوگ کھوتوں کی طرح کام کرتے ہیں. کسی اور کو امپریس کرنے کے لیے میری یہ شرٹ صحیح طرح استری نہیں ہوئی ہوئی, ہر چیز کا بالکل ایفرٹ ڈالتے ہیں ہر چیز کے اندر. گاڑی خریدنی ہو, لمیٹڈ پیسے ہوں, 1000 گاڑیوں کو جا کے دیکھیں گے یہ اس طرح ہے, یہ اس طرح, یہ اس طرح, یہ اس طرح ہے. ہر چیز کے اندر ایفرٹ ڈالنا, توجہ ڈالنا, فوکس ڈالنا, اپنا خون ڈالنا. ایمان کے لیے اسٹرگل کوئی نہیں کرنا چاہتا. They want it on a plate. Give it to me on a plate. مجھے کہتا ہے ایک دفعہ, you want ایمان, you work for it. You work for it. You struggle for it. You cry for it. You do a striving worthy to get it, to get that iman. We just want it on a plate. But the fact of the matter is, you're not going to get it on a plate. You need to work for it. You need to work hard for it. And you need to understand. You are blessed by the fact that آپ ایک مسلمان فیملی کے ہیں, اور آپ نے یعنی آپ کے لیے مشکل نہیں ہے کہ اگر آپ دین کی طرف جائیں. دنیا کے اندر لوگ تیار ہیں کہ آپ نے اگر چھوڑنا ہے وہ مسلمان بن جائیں گے, اور یہ اللہ تعالیٰ کا وعدہ ہے کہ تم نے اگر چھوڑا میں ایک اور قوم لاؤں گا جو تمہاری طرح نہیں ہوگی, وہ اللہ سے محبت کرے گی, اور اللہ ان سے محبت کریں گے. اور ایک اس آیت کا یہ ترجمہ ہے کہ وہ لوگ جو اسلام چھوڑتے ہیں انہوں نے پہلے کبھی اللہ سے انہوں نے محبت ہی نہیں کی. اسی لیے اللہ کہتے ہیں کہ تمہاری طرح نہیں ہوں گے, وہ مجھ سے محبت کریں گے اور میں ان سے محبت کروں گا. تو اس لائف میں بیسک بات یہ ہے کہ اللہ تعالیٰ نے قرآن میں 3 دفعہ یہ وعدہ دیا ہے کہ یہ پیغمبر, یہ اسلام جو ہے پوری دنیا کے اندر غالب ہوگا. It is he who sent his messenger with guidance in the religion of truth so that it may prevail over all religions. And enough is Allah as a witness. And Allah makes the promise again in the Quran. It is he who sent his messenger with guidance in the religion of truth so that it may prevail over other religions even though the disbelievers hate it. And Allah makes the promise again in the Quran. It is he who sent his messenger with guidance in the religion of truth so that it may prevail over all religions even though the mushrik's hate it. 3 times Allah makes the promise in the Quran. And we know that this is a promise. یہ وعدہ جو اللہ کا ہے اس نے ہونا ہے. ہمیں سمجھ آئے نہ سمجھ آئے, ہمیں ڈاؤٹ ہو کہ دنیا کے اندر اسلام کے اوپر اٹیک ہو رہا ہے, ٹرمپ ہر دوسرے دن لگا ہوا ہوتا ہے, ادھر چائنا میں مسلمانوں پہ ظلم ہو رہا ہے, ادھر یہ ہو رہا ہے, ادھر یہ ہو رہا ہے, ادھر یہاں پہ اپنے لوگ کنفیوز ہو رہے ہیں, یہاں پہ یہ ہو رہا ہے. اللہ کا وعدہ آپ کو سمجھ آئے یا نہیں آئے وہ ہونا ہے. اور اگر وہ ہونا ہے تو آپ نے اپنے آپ سے ایک سوال پوچھنا ہے, یا میں ادھر بیٹھوں گا اپنی زندگی ضائع ہوتی رہے گی اور میں اس وعدے کو دیکھوں گا کہ یہ فلفل ہوگا, یا میں اپنی زندگی کے اندر کوشش کروں گا تاکہ میں بھی اس وعدے کا ایک پارٹیسپنٹ ہوں کہ اسلام پوری دنیا کے اندر پھیلے. اور جب آپ وہ اپنی لائف کا مشن بناتے ہیں, جو بھی آپ کے اندر خامیاں ہیں, جو بھی آپ کے اندر فالٹس ہیں, جب آپ کا وہ مشن ہوتا ہے, آپ سنسیئرلی وہ مشن کرنا چاہتے ہیں, تو آپ اپنی لائف میں دیکھنا اللہ آپ کے لیے وہ چیزیں نہیں کرے گا. یعنی Allah will do things that you will not believe are going to happen in your life. You're going to meet people that you're going to think, I never thought I was going to meet this person. You're going to be able to do things that you thought I'd never be able to do that. Absolutely. And in fact, your iman will start to reach the level that you thought was only possible for people that are way better than you. But anything's possible because Allah is the way that you expect.
There is a question. Sister Hashim asked that sometimes you also feel like you are following the truth. Let's leave all the logic behind for a while. But how to trust your feeling? How to build that confidence that yes, I am right? And secondly, if you are feeling contented in any religion, does this guarantees that you are following right religion? If yes, then how does that work?
I'm finding it a little bit hard in Urdu.
No problem.
So one of the scholars, one of the students of knowledge, he said this very, very interesting thing. He said, if you go purely by feelings, you're worshipping yourself. So what Allah does to you sometimes is that you worship Allah, you feel really good. But then Allah takes away that khushu from you, that feeling of good. Now, Allah wants to see, are you doing it for the feeling or are you doing it for Him? So, other philosophies, other religions, other ways of life, there's an emphasis. And the emphasis is on self-worship. You feel good, you're on the right path. Yeah, just do it, Nike, just do it, right? So you've got that type of behavior. You've got this thing that if it feels good, it's right. Islam doesn't work that way. Islam, you do things not because it feels good. You do things because Allah has commanded it. And that may result in you being content at certain points in your life. At other points, you may find it very, very difficult. Some days when you wake up for Fajr, you read Salah and it feels like you've just taken morphine. Other days, you may really not feel like praying. But the fact of the matter is, you have to do both. Because if you just went by good feelings, then it wouldn't work. Now, Islam is a unique religion in the sense that we have a lot of falsification tests. We have ways of discovering whether this is right or wrong, and ways in which, for example, if you look at Zen Buddhism, it's kind of like unfalsifiable. It's just this blanket thing. But in Islam, Allah makes certain claims. Allah says, for example, that if you ask for guidance, He will give it to you. If you ask for signs, and this is clear in the Quran, He will show you signs within the heavens and earth and within yourself that you know this is true. Those signs can be as clear as the moon splitting in your life. To anybody else, it may not make any sense, but in your life, it's equivalent of the sea parting. It's clear. This is from Allah. So, in Islam, we don't just blindly, okay, we're just going to follow. We do that after we realize it's true. Now, if you're at that point where you're kind of thinking, is it even right? Because I heard fundamentally a person, like a professor or my friend or somebody said something. I just think, so somebody said something and you are thinking whether it's true or not. Muhammad ﷺ said something. If you really truly understand the character of the Prophet, what he gave up for this message to reach us, and how he changed the world, and how he was a rose in the desert in terms of his qualities being totally unknown in Arabian society in terms of being unique. Why would you trust this kafir over the Prophet? That's essentially it. It's really an epistemic weighing. Would you, some guy who doesn't even know frankly how to clean his backside properly, or would you go with somebody who, if you study his life, there is no explanation for him other than him being a true messenger of Allah. And if his life was the only thing that we had, you would need no other proof that this is the true religion. So, for the sister, search into Islam, look into the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, look into the meanings of the Quran, coupled with a very simple formula of asking for Allah's guidance. And one thing which I think works, although I haven't really found a way of linking it to guidance, is just try to be grateful in your life for what you have. And when you're grateful, it's almost like it's a floodgate to guidance. Now, I haven't really found a scholar saying this, or maybe this is just my own personal experience, but I find times where I'm feeling a bit spiritually spiritually low, spiritually low in the sense that sometimes you can get demotivated by maybe someone saying something against you online, sometimes having some marital issues, so not really marital issues, but you know what I mean.
Your wife's gonna smash you.
Something going on. So you feel down in the sense, not that you doubt Islam, but down in the sense that you just kind of like things aren't working out the way I thought it's going to work, or this or that. I just find that being grateful is like this clearing of fog. It's like going on the road and you've got all these fog, and you just switch on the button and you get this light switch. And even a moment of gratitude. It doesn't have to be saying Sallallahu towards Makkah, doing 1,000 times a certain wazifa or whatever, right? Just even once, just thinking to yourself, Alhamdulillah, some people don't have legs. Alhamdulillah, I have food to eat, other people don't have food to eat. Alhamdulillah, even being able to breathe. I was reading about one of the Sahaba who on his deathbed said death is like trying to breathe through a pin. Like your throat is like, so death is, when you come near to death of your life, it's like trying to breathe out of a pin. So you just be grateful for even a breath, and you notice that Allah blesses you with certainty, with serenity and with peace.
And Allah says in the Quran, "La in shakartum la azidannakum." کہ اگر تم میرا شکر ادا کرو گے میں تمہیں بڑھا چڑھا کے دوں گا. وَإِن كَفَرْتُمْ, تو Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has used kufr on one side and shukr on the side. So shukr represents iman as well. So last few points from myself. Subhanallah, I'll explain my feelings inshallah ta'ala. کہ میں نے جو آج سیکھا اور جو میں نے فیل کیا وہ یہ کہ اللہ تعالیٰ لازمی ہم سب کو ٹیسٹ کریں گے اس دنیا میں. اللہ تعالیٰ فرماتے ہیں قرآن میں اعوذ باللہ من الشیطان الرجیم ام حسبتم ان یقولوا آمنا وهم لا یفتنون, کہ وہ لوگ کیا گمان کرتے ہیں کہ وہ لوگ کہیں گے کہ آمنا, ہم ایمان لے آئے, وهم لا یفتنون, اور ان کو آزمایا نہیں جائے گا, فتنے میں ڈالا جائے گا. وَلَقَدْ فَتَنَّ الَّذِينَ مِن قَبْلِهِمْ, ہم نے پچھلے لوگوں کو آزمایا تھا. فَلَا يَعْلَمَنَّ الَّذِينَ صَدَقُوا وَلَا يَعْلَمَنَّ الْكَاذِبِينَ, کہ اللہ تعالیٰ جانیں گے کہ تم میں سے سچے کون تھے اور وہ جان لیں گے تم سے جھوٹے کون تھے. سو اللہ ول surely ٹیسٹ us, چاہے وہ ٹیسٹ شہوات کے اس میں ہو, ٹیمپٹیشنز ڈیزائرز کے اس میں ہو, یا شبہات کے اس میں ہو, کہ بلیف ان قرآن, بلیف ان گاڈ. یہ ٹیسٹ ہماری لائف میں اللہ تعالیٰ لازمی آزمائیں گے ہم سب کو. تو سکسیزفل وہ لوگ ہوں گے جو اس پہ استقامت اختیار کریں گے اور اس پہ ڈٹ جائیں گے اور اسی راستے پہ چلتے رہیں گے. کیونکہ شیخ البانی رحمہ اللہ یوسف سے کہ جو اللہ کا راستہ ہے بڑا لمبا ہے, and we are traveling with the speed of turtle. And we are traveling with the speed of turtle. Allah doesn't want us to reach the destiny, but He wants us to die on this path. So all what we can try is کہ ہم لوگ جو کر رہے ہیں لائف میں وہ کرتے رہیں. اینڈ یہ جو بلیفس ہے نا کہ the West is بہت ترقی کر رہا ہے اور بہت آگے بڑھ رہا ہے, اینڈ میرے ایک جاننے والے نے کہا کہ ایسا لگتا ہے کہ خدا نعوذ باللہ خدا ویسٹ میں براجمان ہوا ہے, نعوذ باللہ, کہ جیسے ویسٹ میں خدا آ کے بیٹھ گیا ہے اور اپنا جو عرش ہے وہیں پہ لگا دیے, بیکاز there is so much progress and scientific researches and architecture and everything. subhanallah, I was thinking کہ اللہ کے نبی نے کیسی زندگی گزاری, کیا وہ کامیاب نہیں تھے؟ ان کی زندگی میں وہ کھجور کے بنے ہوئے بستروں پہ سوتے تھے اور سادی سی لائف گزاری. عمر بن خطاب نے کیسی لائف گزاری. سو یہ چیز کبھی نہ دیکھیں, کیونکہ اگر دین اس دنیا کی امپورٹنس اتنی ہوتی نا اللہ کی نظر میں تو وہ کافر کبھی نہ دیتا. اللہ تعالیٰ کہتے ہیں قرآن میں کہ حدیث قدسی ہے کہ اگر اس دنیا کی جو قیمت ہے میری نظر میں مچھر کے پر سے بھی زیادہ ہوتی, میں کافروں کو ایک پانی کا گھونٹ بھی نہ دیتا. تو یہ جان لیں کہ سکسیس کا یہ معیار نہیں ہے کہ کس کے پاس زیادہ پیسہ ہے, کس کے پاس بڑی گاڑی ہے, کس کے پاس بڑا بنگلہ ہے, یا کس کے پاس جو ہے نا بہت ترقی کر رہا ہے کون سا ملک. یہ سکسیس کا کرائٹیریا نہیں ہے. سکسیس کا کرائٹیریا کیا ہے کہ اندر کا جو سیلف ہے وہ کتنا کانٹینٹ ہے, مطمئن ہے, اور آپ صحیح دین پہ چل رہے ہیں نہیں. اف یو آر فالوئنگ دا قرآن اینڈ دا سنہ, آپ کی زندگی میں مشکلات آئیں گی. یہ تو صحیح بات ہے, کیونکہ اللہ تعالیٰ اپنے نیک بندوں کو آزماتے ہیں. اللہ نے سب سے زیادہ اپنے انبیاء کو آزمایا اور انبیاء میں سب سے زیادہ اپنے رسول کو آزمایا. سو کیا نعوذ باللہ اللہ تعالیٰ ان کو عذاب دے رہے تھے یا ان سے خوش نہیں تھے؟ ایسی بات نہیں ہے. لیکن جو فرق ہے وہ یہ ہے کہ جو مومن ہے چاہے وہ جتنی زیادہ مصیبتوں میں بھی ہو وہ اندر سے اللہ کے ساتھ کنیکشن فیل کر رہا ہوتا ہے and he is satisfied. لیکن ایک بندہ جس کا اللہ سے کوئی تعلق نہیں ہے, اس کے پاس آسائشیں ہیں دنیا جہان کی, اس کو ایک کانٹا بھی چپ جائے تو اس کے لیے ایک نائٹ میئر ہوتا ہے and he feels depressed and anxiety. So ٹیسٹس آئیں گے لائف میں, شبہات آئیں گے, شہوات فتنے آئیں گے, بس اللہ تعالیٰ سے دعا کرتے رہیں کہ یا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلبی علی دینک. حضرت عائشہ سے پوچھا کہ اللہ کے رسول سب سے زیادہ کون سی دعا کرتے ہیں, تو نے یہ دعا پڑھی. He used to say this most of the time کہ یا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلبی علی دینک, اے دلوں کو پھیرنے والے میرے دل کو دین پہ قائم رکھنا. So these are two cents from my side. Suboor, Jazakumullah khair for having a great session with us, and we'll definitely have another session on evolution, particularly inshallah, to break it down to basics کہ آج کل کا جو فتنہ ہے evolution کا, and especially Darwinism theory کہ یہ لوگ اس پہ جو believe کرتے ہیں, and اصل میں ہم لوگ جو Darwinism کے بارے میں جانتے ہیں وہ نہیں ہے جو actually Darwinism ہے, ہم لوگ بہت shallow basic level پہ جانتے ہیں. So inshallah Suboor will break it down to us inshallah ta'ala. And بارک اللہ فیکم. آپ لوگوں کے پاس کوئی بھی کوشچنز ہو, ہم انشاءاللہ Suboor کا جو پیج کا لنک ہے اس میں پوسٹ کر دیں گے, آپ ان کو انباکس کر سکتے ہیں. اینڈ اٹس فور دا ونڈرفل سیشن برادر, جزاک اللہ خیر.